afternoon, everyone, and really great to be invited to this next summit. Happy to speak to you. Hope everybody is doing well. I'd like to talk about the changing expectations and pharma's brave new world, the next better. And when I think about that, I think about what has happened in the last 18 months. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone that it's been an incredible roller coaster ride, and that I think we all had to face ourselves on how to navigate with what was going on in the world. And while we were actually mostly staying apart, working remotely, working from home, as a healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, I think we were pulled together more than ever before. In the last 18 months, we had to work more intensively with stakeholders across the whole world in order to do what was necessary to navigate this pandemic and come up with solutions. Government, let's say payers, patients, we all came together and in order to drive that. And when I think about the impact of these last 18 months, the Daft Punk song Harder, the Daft Punk's Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger comes to mind. I think I speak again on behalf of all of us that we all had to work harder in a different way, reinventing ourselves in order to get things done. We had to reorganize the way we work from home. For a pharmaceutical company like ourselves, who also took on the commitment to work towards a COVID-19 vaccine, it meant, first of all, keeping our business afloat, making sure that our medicines could get to patients, because in the kind of therapeutic areas that we work, it was literally often a question of life or death, but at the same time, free up resources, people and funding to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. And I also know that post the pandemic, it's going to continue to be harder. And I'll talk about each of these in more detail later on. Better as well. I think every time that you are confronted with something of this magnitude that hits us so frontal, I think eventually you emerge stronger. That's human nature. That is who we are. I think we actually get up, dust off, and see how we can navigate and work better towards, let's say, that next better, the next normal. Faster as well. I think the pace of change that we saw and how quickly we had to react again in the 18 last months, when, let's say, the news from Wuhan came in December, January, until we are together, everybody had to work so much faster than before without sacrificing quality, but certainly working much leaner, much faster in an accelerated way versus what we were used to. And then finally, also stronger. I think if you survive something like this, and obviously we have no other option than to survive this, you will become stronger. You will emerge stronger, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. So all of that eventually leads to the next normal. And I think being part of this summit, the title of the summit is actually well chosen. It is about that next normal, the next better. And I think bringing that all together eventually will lead to a better world. Now, if I translate that next normal to the industry that I am confronted with, it's clear that the old normal is gone. It's really out the door. And again, for these last 18 months, our company specifically as well has been under a microscope. Every step on the way, from initial discovery through development, through eventually distribution and getting medicines or our vaccine to patients, has been really looked at from every detail, every angle. And we had to do all of that in an accelerated way, but you could not, let's say, sacrifice any quality. You could not cut any corners. And that next normal and what we've experienced for the last 18 months clearly leads to different expectations. And obviously that offers opportunities, but these expectations also come with challenges to our industry, to healthcare in general. And again, I'll go into that in detail as well. So why has it gotten harder? Well, first of all, I think the positive thing is that because we took up the responsibility as an industry, as a pharmaceutical industry, I think the trust in healthcare clearly increased, and it actually increased with 8 percentage points, which is huge if you look at, or if you follow these kind of trends on let's say, how trust is being evaluated. So of all of the sectors that were actually surveyed, the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, actually scored the highest. And that's unseen because you all know that our reputation has not been where I think it needed to be. So that was great. Pharmaceutical and established pharmaceutical companies actually jumped over biotech, younger biotech companies in that ranking, and still were number 2 behind hospitals. But it clearly has got harder because that reputation boost came with specific expectations as well. And obviously, that also, when you are so much under the microscope, if every step along the way of trying to come with solutions to address this crisis that we were confronted with, you're also confronted with what I would call some side effects. And clearly, one of them is health misinformation. There's been more, let's say, talk about anti-vaccination and so on, and it has detrimental consequences. And you see some of the headlines here, especially also amplified by social media, which of course gives a forum to everyone to have an opinion. And I sometimes feel that the current generations do not realize anymore what the devastating effects of diseases like polio or smallpox were. I mean, they actually eradicated huge parts of population. So the thing is also, there is that quest for information. People want to get informed. They want to get, let's say, information every step on the way. And so social media comes in, but it's also the fact that people want to have a two-way street. They just do not want one-sided information. They want to get into a dialogue as well. So again, it's an opportunity and a threat at the same time. Everybody has a voice. Also, people that are against, let's say, vaccination get a voice. And people sometimes say, well, COVID-19 is the first big pandemic to hit world population, and the next one will be antimicrobial resistance, something that we've been talking about for more than a decade as well. But I actually think, and experts think, that the threat of misinformation about health and well-being, amplified by social media, where you get a kind of a Chinese whisper trend going on, where people just share facts and opinions, and then it gets really washed down to something where there's no basis anymore. That is the biggest threat to health for humanity. That kind of misinformation might lead to more devastating effects than any pandemic can actually create. So it's something that we clearly deal with. It becomes really harder. And again, with what we've accomplished with COVID-19 as an industry, that raises expectations as well. So it will become harder. Think then on the next step, every country had to really finance what was needed in order to deal with the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that meant really financing very deeply, going into overruns with budgets. Now, at some point, that money needs to be refunded. And when you look where governments spend their money, usually healthcare comes quickly in scope. And within healthcare budgets, a pharmaceutical industry is what I would call a sitting duck. It's always easier to go after a pharmaceutical industry than to close an unproductive hospital. So that's also why it becomes harder from any angle that you can look at. Now, going back to that new normal, I think it's going to be important for healthcare or for the pharmaceutical industry to find some important balances between certain big themes. First one is profit versus altruism. Obviously, a pharmaceutical company like ours, like Janssen, we are a for-profit company. We have a responsibility towards shareholders. So we are a highly risk environment, a highly risk industry. Why would somebody put their money in a pharmaceutical company rather than in a company like Apple, which maybe has less of a risk? So you need to make sure there is a reward for that investment. So profit is important. On the other hand, altruism is also important. We felt as a company, for example, that when we were going to try to bring a COVID-19 vaccine to the world, it would not be appropriate that we would make a profit as we would do with other medications. That felt like you would benefit from the pandemic. So we early on, even before we had any concept of whether we would be able to bring a workable vaccine to the market, we said, if we are going to do that, it has to be on a not-for-profit model during that pandemic phase. It means that, yes, we should be able to recuperate our costs, but not take a penny of profit on top of that. And we actually will have that validated by an independent organization and not use our own methodology to prove that. So I think that was an important consideration to make, and I still believe that that was a very important decision. But also going forward, I think it's something that we have to keep in mind, because this won't, unfortunately, be the last pandemic. So how do you actually balance that way as a leading company with a high responsibility for the well-being of patients between profit and altruism? It's something that every company should ask themselves, in my view. The second thing is about, in that new normal, is about, let's say, the balance between cost and value. I personally feel that healthcare is still often too much seen as a cost to society, where it should be more seen as an investment. If you go to work, the payoff is immensely. So it's actually an investment for the future. If we invest now to make sure that our population can have access to the best innovative medication, you'll reap the benefits later on. There's always, of course, the challenge between the trade-off that you have to have a cash outlay now in order to reap the return later on. I see that dilemma, but yet every discussion I have with government authorities is look at it as an investment. Don't consider it to be a cost. So it's an important consideration as well when you think about building a better future. Then I think we were confronted with the balance or the trade-off between thinking about population health and personalized medicines. A company like ours, like Janssen, I think I speak for most of the innovative companies in our industry, have been taking the route of more and more personalized medicine, target medicines. What works for me might not work for you and might not work for a third person. As we get more and more insights in the whole DNA and start developing now medications that go into gene and cell therapy, that is the future as well. And you can see that, I mean, that personalized medicine clearly is going to have major benefits when it comes to overall survival for people that are suffering from really bad diseases. So that was the route that we were taking. And this was all before the pandemic. Then COVID-19 hit, and actually it held a mirror in front of us to say, hold on, there is something like population health. There is something like making sure that we do right for society as well, for the broad population. And so I think that's a new trade-off that we have to make. Obviously, that route toward personalized medicine will continue on. But I also feel that, again, as leading companies in the pharmaceutical industry, we have to take that responsibility and also come up with long-term solutions before the next pandemic hits. I think that's also our invisible contract with society, that we think about what can we do in order to prevent this from happening again. So it's another balance to look for. And then also clearly people that have heard me before say that I've spoken about well care more than about sick care. Today, our model is based on sick care. We wait until people get sick. That model has been working for 100 years now. We wait until people get sick, and only then we take action. And I've made that comment often, that 50 years from now, people will look back at 2021 and will say, can you believe it? In 2021, they waited for people to get sick before action was taken. So we have to move to well care. It goes again to that investment, looking at our industry, at healthcare as an investment. Well care means that you start to treat people earlier, before things take place. If you can go from treatment to interception to prevention, going west is like what I would call it, I think the benefits would be enormous. Now, that's hard. The concept of, let's say, a payer, a government payer or a private payer, having to pay for something that has not taken place yet is always difficult to do. But I still believe that that is the future. And it's actually not a recent invention. In the 17th century in China, a physician in a small village would be paid by the number of people in his village that he or she could keep healthy. And the dotation would be based on that. The higher that number of people that was going to stay healthy, the bigger the dotation. So it's that mindset shift that we have to continue to work in order to get to that next better normal. So it's also about to accelerate and find faster solutions. And again, I think we've been forced the last 18 months to really rethink the way we work. So instead, like if you develop a medicine that you do everything sequentially, we actually did it in parallel. We started our, let's say, our development process for a COVID-19 vaccine, and we started to produce at risk, even not knowing whether the vaccine would hit the market, but we knew that was the only way that we could do that. We had to do things in parallel in order to get to patients as quickly as possible. And the other thing was we could cut so much red tape working with different stakeholders. And I think that was an amazing observation that all of a sudden, boundaries that used to be there, bureaucracy, that was all put to the side. Where normally when you submit a file for a new medicine, you would just be at the bottom of the stack. Now, everything on the vaccine would be put on top of the stack. We could get things done literally in 3 days' time that would normally take us 6 to 9 weeks when it came to specific licenses for let's say, a new factory that needed specific conditions to operate under. So that is absolutely a fantastic achievement as well. Now, the challenge with that is that people are going to see that as a new reality, and that would be wrong. Let's say the efforts, the funding that we got for COVID-19 cannot just be transposed for any existing or new medicine that comes around, because we live by exceptional rules. That funding is simply not there. And that's what I mean with managed expectations. People ask me now sometimes, well, you could have done, you did that vaccine in 18 months. Why can you not replicate that model for any medicine? And that's, let's say, the false expectations that we have. So we have to make sure that we manage expectations. Yes, obviously, I think we learn a lot, and there's clearly relationships that we now build and things that we learned along the way that will help us to be better towards the future. But what we've accomplished as an industry in the last 18 months, unfortunately, cannot be the standard, because that would not be realistic. So it's really about how do you manage expectations with, let's say, what is realistic going forward. And that expectation of going to work faster, yes, some of that will stay, but some of that will turn out to be impossible as well. Now, we clearly are now getting from that new to that next normal. And that's also what I mean about being faster. New relationships have been built, and I think they are there to last. What we've accomplished in the last 18 months with these stakeholders, some of that will clearly stay. We brought people together. Some of the things that we actually now did faster will remain. I think we start thinking about being better prepared for when the next pandemic could hit. There's things that we put in our processes that will help us to be faster in a pandemic phase, but also in non-pandemic phase. I think we really looked at the foundation of what our industry was built on, what our models were built on. And sometimes it takes a seismic shock to really build that next normal. Think about your models, your go-to-market models, your development models, and see what can emerge in order to become stronger. And I think we will be stronger than ever before. I already spoke about the new relationships that we established, but it's also about taking a more proactive look. You know, this week, President von der Leyen made her announcement on the State of the Union for the EU. And one of the things she spoke about is the HERA, the Health Emergency and Response Authority, in order just to bring all the right stakeholders together to prepare for the next pandemic, and to make sure that we do not have to survive or to go through what we lived through in the last 18 months. I don't think any one of us would sign up for that anyway. But there's also private initiatives. We are working as a company, for example, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and with other companies to see, like, what can we do? And I believe that leading companies like ours, like many that you work for, should have an invisible contract with society to make sure that we continue to be stronger. I think governments are out of their depth to deal with a crisis of this magnitude, a health crisis like this. So if companies like ours, like Johnson & Johnson, like many other companies, are not going to step up and do what is necessary, we won't be doing well on the next pandemic. So that invisible contract with society, I think, is something that we all should own. And that, I think, will make us stronger as an industry, but also as a worldwide healthcare environment. And again, that brings me to maybe the final point that I want to make, is that is a Phoenix mindset. And this Phoenix mindset is a concept of futurologist Peter Hinson. And he talks about, we've spoken in the last decade a lot about unicorns. And unicorns, those are these startup companies that quickly reach a market cap of $1 billion US dollar. Actually, the technology that we use for this session, Hop-In, is one of those unicorns, as Dario mentioned to me yesterday. So unicorns are going to be critically important going forward. They really think about and invent what the future will look like, and they challenge the status quo, and they come up with new things. But it's really important that established companies keep reinventing themselves as well. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, that I'm part of, that are there for more than 130 years. Really, why are we around for so long? Because we have the ability to continue to recreate ourselves, and over emerging stronger, building on applications like innovation, creativity, brainstorming, and really ride the wave of change before change happens to us. And I think most of you work for companies like that as well. But these Phoenix companies that keep rising from their ashes are going to be so important, because contrary to unicorns, they have the critical mass. They are world players. They have usually deep pockets. They have tons of experience. They have so much know-how, so much experience, that they really need to be the backbone to deal when change comes, to deal before the next pandemic comes, to deal with what healthcare should be looking like in the future. And they can do that in combination with these unicorns that will challenge the status quo as well, but it has to go hand in hand. It's a complete new ecosystem in that new normal, where Phoenix companies, unicorns, other stakeholders like governments, like patients, all come together and really work better. So I'm a big believer in that the best days of humanity are still in front of us. And I'd like to end this talk with, let's say, a lyric from one of my most favorite band in the world, and their best record, Abbey Road. There's a song written by George Harrison, Here Comes the Sun. And it actually says, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. It feels like years since it's been here, but here comes the sun. And I say, it's all right. And believe me, I believe it will be all right if we actually embrace that next normal. So thank you for listening to me. And I don't know if we still have time for any questions.
Hello, everyone. Kris, first of all, amazing presentation. I would like just to pick one very interesting question from Yahed, if you don't mind, which is, I think having this mindset shift accompanied by patient inclusion is the way to go, but how do we co-design these solutions with patients?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have, certainly as a pharmaceutical company, is that we are not allowed to interact with patients directly, but we are able to inform patients. And so patient education, I think, is really a backbone. And we try to get into dialogue, obviously, all under, let's say, the umbrella of doing that in a compliant way, but we like to listen to patients as much as possible. You will see that in the development of the medicines that we now do, the patient voice is so important. And I have to say, Dario, that some of the features of the medicines that we introduced in the last 5 years were actually made better because of the input of patients saying, tell me what you need. Obviously, a physician knows very well the conditions that we try to address, but the patient knows the experience that he and she actually goes through in dealing with a disease. So that is important. The second thing is patients now clearly have a voice, and that's the positive about social media. I mean, you think about portals or websites like Patients Like Me, there is so much, let's say, that patients share, and they get such an amplifying effect. So that I think is really important. And we've seen that. We had instances where medicines actually passed all of the regulatory and payers hurdles, and then patients stood up and said, hey, wait a minute, no, this is not affordable, or this is not acceptable, where pharmaceutical companies were actually forced to rethink their pricing and their go-to-market model. And sometimes that is confrontational, but you learn from that. So I think the patient is going to be such a key stakeholder going forward. And I honestly think that is a fantastic evolution, because in the end, that's who you do it for. It's to really address patient needs.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Kris, to this interesting, extremely interesting keynote. I would like to close that with your quote, which is "The best days are in front of us," and I fully agree with that. And hopefully, we can all together shape this patient inclusion at first place across the 3 days at the next normal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dario, and have a great summit. Great, thanks for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kris. Bye.
Bye-bye.